Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to my channel and specifically my PowerShell module video series that I'm doing to kind of give you an insight into the module that I'm working with. And I have a couple updates. I did decide to go ahead and officially modify the name and went ahead and set up the project now. So this will now be called IPControl-PSMod, and we'll get rid of the version 9. I felt there was some ambiguity about the name that actually might confuse the version of IP control with this version of module. So made this a little bit easier. But two scenarios I want to go through this morning, real world scenarios in terms of IP address assignments around VLAN IDs and the ability through automation to request the next available IP by simply inputting a number of parameters like VLAN and having it then return and go out and get the next available IP and return the addresses back to the user. The second part of this scenario is when you start to enable subnets to handle automation is to keep track of the utilization. Since we may be doing some things, or at least I am in this shell, where I go out and I get subnets based on the VLAN, I then check the utilization to make sure that I'm not overutilizing. But there should also be some level of reporting that gives you the ability to check what VLANs are assigned, which ones are API enabled, if you will, and to have some level of detail there. So the first thing I just want to go through real quick, I did create one of these to do that. And in this report, I'm using this example to go out and get the IP, the child block query. And what I'm going to do is specify that I'm going to have a UDF query of any subnets that have the API enabled equals on check flag on the subnet. And this is what I use in my projects in order to indicate that a subnet is API enabled. And then I associate an VLAN ID. And that allows me that when I'm working with a VLAN with multiple subnets, that I can add or remove a subnet by simply changing this flag from on and off and modifying the subnet, and it immediately disappears from that list of available subnets. So that's how I use this. And so what I wanted to do is then generate a list of reports that could go out and get this information, then pull through a subnet list and then get the IP utilization of each of those subnets, and then outputting this information then to a HTML output that we can then look at as a table. So the idea here is that this might be run on demand. It might be something that you want to set up flags. So when it runs through and queries the utilization, it might set up a flag that sends an SNMP trap or alert or performs some type of reconciliation or some types of remediation project task to effectively change the outcome. So really what I'm doing is real simple here, and I'm just going to hit run on this. And really when it creates this HTML, it just generates and invokes the HTML file and loads it up into a browser, and then we're going to look at it from there. But I imagine on something like this, you may want to have this copy up into an HTTP server, where it then might be loaded into a specific project or a date. And then here's how I have this just displayed out, that you have the lowest to highest number of IP addresses. And all of these are basically API enabled. And it gives me some indicators here that I've got some, issues, up here in the zeros. I probably want to have some type of alerts here. These are probably below some type of threshold of utilization based on their mask and size. And then getting down into, some other available sizes. All right, so that's the first part of this. Now, having that is good. That is, you're doing this over time to be able to trap an alert on it. Now, the second part is, one is I've already started implementing my PSMod. And just one of the notes about the module, I did this last night in my development of this or changing of this, that I went ahead and added all of the PowerShell versions. So Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core for both Windows and for Linux. And then I changed all of the different API methods and the invoke REST methods to use a custom command that went out and determined what those versions were so that it made the appropriate calls. And effectively, then I can take this same module, copy it to any platform that supports PowerShell, and will run natively without change. And that was my goal. And that was accomplished last night. So I'm much, much closer to deploying this module now. So anyway, let's go back through this particular example. And this was just a real quick script I added to add a series of IP addresses by VLAN ID. So what I wanted to do is just show you here in the input parameters, which you can turn this into a function with input. I'm going out and checking for this IP address or VLAN ID, and I want to tell it that I don't want 200. I want to make this, let's make this 20. And let's take a look at one more setting. Okay, so in the settings, the quantity I wanted to make sure of, I also need to make sure I cleared out that subnet first in my testing. But we're going to go ahead and use some other, predetermined defaults for these values. And again, this would be something you might want to change in your inputs. But the subnets here, then I'm going to then run the child block query. So again, specifying that query using the VLAN ID and then also the API enable. So I'm pulling out specifically just the blocks that are matching those two criteria. Now then what I'm doing is I'm pulling out and stripping out just the subnet information from the block adder, which is pulled back in that list. So I'm just grabbing this and I'm sorting it for a unique in the event that there's multiple blocks attached. And then I'm using the get IP subnet utilization API, which we call here, to pull back just the utilization of that subnet. Now what I want to do with it at this point is strip out the specific fields I'm interested in. Many of these, number available and user defined and so on. And then I'm going to add to a subnet utility array the output of this information so that I have a block array, if you will, that I'm then going to go in and sort. So if you recall in some of the other discussions, the output of this is typically by database ID of the block or IP or whatever data type it is. So I'm adding in here again this IP integer for the subnet, which this convert to decimal works as well. And I'm adding that into this property so I can sort it like I have with the others. Okay, so we're sorting this based on a descending list because I want the highest number of available hosts, which this utilization reports back on this particular property. Now, in terms of the sorted list, I want to pick the first available highest number in descending order, which is 0, right? The chosen block IP then is going to be setting for that IP, which is going to pull back then a subnet. When I import the device, I'm going to specify the subnet address and not the IP address. I'm then going to tell it my device type and my other fields here. I'm going to apply a apply naming policy for the host device. So whenever I select an address type or device type, there's a IP control naming policy that can be applied to generate unique names. Then specifying the additional domain types and others. And then I'm going down a little bit further and specifying that I want to set up DNS and then to pull back the results. And I'm looping through this for the quantity and generating then a new IPs array, which again, then I can do other things with like sorting and some other functions. Okay, so just to run that command then real quick, I'm just going to run get 5 addresses. I don't know which one this will pull run, so let's just kind of get an idea so we can go look at it from the subnet list. And we'll step through. So here's our subnets that it's pulled back into the child block, so we're going to compare. And then for each subnet in there, which we're pulling back just the IP address, we're going to go out and get the utilization. And this then pulls back, and this is a fully available subnet, which the bottom IP count 1022. And we're going to go ahead and append our additional information, add that to the array. We're going to go ahead and get the next, which I expect should be 8. And I should have about the same count available in here as well. So now the interesting thing will be, how will this pull back the interesting list? So, so the sorted list then is going to be by number of available and is sorted by the lowest IP. So that's the chosen block. We're going to go ahead and select it, and we'll just go through and process the next 5. And what I should get back then is just the output of that 5. But what I expect I should do here is then either email, add some additional details to it, or look through some other functionality here to extend this in the notification process. And then if I go back into my subnet now, we should then see this list. All right, so there's our 20 IP addresses that we just added. Now let's try that one more time. I want to see what happens again with the network again. So now that we know that the 40 has 20 assigned, we should then maybe get a different utilization number. And let me just verify my logic's working here. All right, so that's down to 1,002, so that's good. We'll add that back to its list, and this one should still 1,022. All right, that's perfect, and that gave me back the 8.0. So now it's going to kind of flip between these two subnets, unless I tell it to do something else. Now I may want to have some type of preference where I go in and set up one, or if this VLAN, of course, doesn't support multiple IPs and subnets, I would disable one. So speaking of, let's go back and do that real quick just to show you what that flag does, because it is something we can work with there. And let's turn off the 4.0 so it doesn't even appear in that list, or at least it should not appear in that list. And let's run that one more time. And I think we should get here then the 8.0 only. Yep, there you go. And so that's what we should get then. So now I won't even do any other comparison. It'll select the one. So that's what I expected to happen. And it'll keep going out now in this particular case and use just that one VLAN ID. So I hope you saw something here. I'm not sure I'm going to do too many more of these scenarios right away, since I'm going to go ahead and focus on getting the module. But just wanted to let you know that I'm very close to this. I've got the cross-platform working. I think some good examples here for how some users today use this by assigning the next available IPs by VLAN ID and checking those. So I hope that works. And again, this is kind of the end of this series, but stay tuned for the IPControl-PSMod release. Should be, again, like I said, the next week or two as soon as I clean up my code. Thanks again. Take care, and look forward to talking with you soon.